All right, I'm going to give some details about how to use RStudio a little bit better. So one step, or one of the early things we want to do, is how do I share my output and my results? Maybe you want to share it with somebody in your study group. Maybe you want an instructor to see a homework assignment, or maybe you want to share your research with the discipline. So I'm going to give you a bunch of possible ways and remind you it's okay if you don't start off, great from day one. But on the other hand, you do want to be steadily improving. Now, one of the easiest ways to share is just take a screenshot of your output. Now, the really ugly kludge version of that is use your phone to take a picture of your screen. Not optimal, no, but on the other hand, I've been there. There are times when, for various reasons, that may be just where we're at. But on the other hand, you want to start developing better options. Next step up the ladder would be have a file where you copy paste the commands and copy paste the output, maybe some comments on the output. That's ugly enough, but we can do better. Next step, create a file called RMD, which is our markdown file. It creates one computer code that has the text of your output and the code that runs it all joined together. With this markdown, you can tell it, okay, what output should be created. So, advantage of an integrated markdown file is, I want to write up my results. If I have a separate word processing file, then I would type, for instance, the average value was, and then go over to the data analysis program, execute a bunch of commands, calculate the average value, and then copy paste into the Google Doc or whatever word processing file. I mean, it's fine once or twice, but it's not very efficient, and it is error prone. Sometimes your finger slips with the copy pasta, it drops a digit. Or you make a change later on, maybe the most minor change, but then you got to go back and update all those. And you got to remember, maybe you miss one. I mean, it's just inviting errors. The R Markdown file allows you to have a single program that creates a document. So you can type the average value was, and then type some code that says, okay, R, now calculate the average value and insert it right here. You can do tables and charts in the same way. It's a really useful capability. So from File, New File, choose R Markdown. I've shown that up top. Creates a markdown file for you as an example that's below. As with many things in this class, you might say, yeesh, I'm barely clinging on by my fingertips. I cannot possibly bear to learn one goddamn thing more. In which case, fine, you do not have to learn one goddamn thing more. On the other hand, if you're like, hey, I'm getting into this, or maybe at some point down the line you feel that way, then you can learn it, put a pin there. One of my goals in this class is to convince a bunch of you that this would be a good career. If you find that you enjoy learning new stuff, then it's a very good career and pays a ton of money. I'm proud of all the students that go on with a lot less work experience than me, but make more money than I do. I mean, I'm teaching here in this public schools, but, private sector pays very well. Maybe at some point down the line, you'll want to come back and learn better. So, put a pin in your brain. A metaphorical pin. Please, no, don't actually put a pin in your brain. Don't be so literal. Anyway, the output can be in an MD file. That's a markdown file. GitHub knows exactly how to display that. That's how I put up a lot of the documents for this course. You can output other types of files, web page, HTML, PDF, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint type slides. It's lots and lots of options. There's a link to the R Markdown cheat sheet, gives some popular choices. But basically you create the RMD file in RStudio and then you knit it together. See there, I've put a red circle around the knit command, K-N-I-T there. Because you want to be getting to be a better storyteller. I mean, analytics is not just doing the complicated technical stuff. It's also explaining why that complicated technical stuff was important and explaining what it means. You need to be able to communicate your findings. You can't just vomit out the raw output. Now, early in the class, okay, that's just what you do. You got to show that you can do it. That's, where you're at. But you want to get to having nice tables, nice charts, output that explains what's going on. Partly because that's how you yourself gain an understanding of what's going on. We humans are narrative thinkers. So one of the virtues of the Markdown file integrates both the text of the narrative and calculations. Look at the bottom of the file. There's code that says pretty num, which calculates a number and tells R how to write it out in a pretty way. That way, if the data set changes, maybe one of your teammates goes through and notice, oh crap, we had an extra line, something went wrong, blah, 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 or hey, I found a few more observations, something like that, then it just automatically updates. You're not copy pasting from R to your Google Docs file or something. If you're doing this as a job in your career, you might have regular reports to get run, in which case, you automate it all. Last month, we had blank sales, and you just tell R, count it up, dude, and it puts that into the document. It makes it a lot easier for you, the human. I realize this is a little more complicated, but it's a goal you can aspire to as the semester goes on. By the end of the class, I'm going to want you to write a pretty substantial report. Now you can make your code fancy for different levels of fancy. At the beginning, it may be pretty simple, just, code output kind of simple, but get better as you go along. I'll show you the steps so you can see what's going on behind the scenes. You can read the knitted output, but then look at the Markdown file that created that output. You can go through, see each step. Plain Markdown file, readable by GitHub, is meant to be very plain. It's not supposed to be fancy fonts and colors and whiz-bang stuff. It's meant plain and simple. But if you want to create other fancier, lovelier output, then go learn those ways. There are even people creating artwork with R. That cheat sheet has some of the basics for stuff like headers and bold and underline italics and whatever. Now, another component of RStudio is the ability to create projects. A project is a really useful way to keep all your code together in its own folder. I know the typical method is just shove all the files at random on Google Drive and whatever. If you want to be a hoarder, that's how you want to live your life, that's on you. But I will exhort you to do better. Better ways to create each project in a separate folder. Keep all the files there. That way you can easily port it around, share it with other people. Each time you start the session, you double click on the R project file. There, I've shown an example how that works. Now your operating system might hide the file extension. You might have to squint to decipher which is which, or you just give it a good name. Double click on that file to bring up RStudio. Everything is back where you left off. But one of the things to remind here is sharing is caring. We want to create projects that are replicable. It's a fundamental principle of how science is done. Somebody else should be able to take your file, run the same commands, and get the same output answers. That idea of replicability is a fundamental aspect of doing science right. One of the key parts of any scientific enterprise is somebody else can take the same data and get the same answer. That's a way of demonstrating that your conclusions are valid. You provide replicable commands so somebody else can get the same answers if they did the same things. That's also relevant because you'll be working in groups and you want to keep your team all together. If I do it and another team member does it as well, then we better come up with the same output. Most jobs involve teamwork. This is a useful career skill as well. It's another reason I'm encouraging you to figure out GitHub, because that's a useful way to demonstrate your skills to somebody, like a prospective employer. If all the files needed to do a particular analysis are all sitting in the same folder, then it's easy to share that folder. Don't be a hoarder with a huge random collection of junk. Particularly, you might want to come back to some of the code at a later date. Maybe even just a week later, depending on how much fun you have the weekend, you might not remember everything you did previously. Be nice to yourself, to your future self. Your future self will appreciate the time you're putting in now to be more organized. But sharing is caring. Remember that.